Welcome to Culture and History. Every culture has a story, and every story shapes our culture. I'm your host, K and H, and this space is about truth, reflection, and rediscovery. Here we dive deep beneath the surface of what we've been told, exploring the stories that formed humanity's consciousness, from ancient to the modern world. So let's open the scroll and begin this journey. And please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Okay, let's kick things off. When America looks into the mirror today, who stares back? Is it still that, classic image? The self-assured patriarch?
Or is it something else?
Yeah.
A kind of kaleidoscope of faces, black, brown, yellow, mixed.
Exactly. It feels like we're in this moment of, profound identity crisis. It's more than just politics. It feels deeper, like a civilizational reckoning.
That tension is really what we need to explore today. Our source material frames it as this collision, right, between America's inherited sort of Eurocentric past
and its actual present, the multi-ethnic, pluralistic reality on the ground.
Precisely. The sources put it starkly. It's a choice between rebirth or repetition, repeating the old ideological blueprint.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We need to unpack how that original American idea got codified, how it was made exclusive.
Then what happens psychologically, politically, when the group that was the statistical majority is on track to become a minority.
Right. And ultimately, what could the future face of America, maybe even the face of Uncle Sam himself, look like as that demographic center shifts?
We're really digging into the foundational blueprint here. If the original design assumed one group as the default, what happens when that assumption just isn't statistically true anymore? The whole structure feels the strain.
Okay, let's unpack this inherited foundation you mentioned. The idea of America. It wasn't homegrown, was it? The research calls it imported.
That's right. Deliberately constructed, really, on ideals drawn from Greco-Roman thought, Judeo-Christian tradition, and the European Enlightenment. These were presented as the peak, the universal standard.
But what's fascinating, or maybe ironic, is that even those ideals weren't purely European in origin.
Exactly. The material we looked at emphasizes that the foundational knowledge, things like mathematics, philosophy, governance, drew heavily from much older global traditions. From Kemet, which is ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Phoenicia, Persia.
So the Western story involved, a kind of forgetting, an erasure of those origins.
A deliberate erasure, yes. The argument is that the Western canon was actively rewritten. Greece was positioned as the singular birthplace of civilization.
Not just an academic oversight, then.
No, an ideological project. It effectively sidelined Africa and the East from the West's intellectual family tree. And this laid the groundwork for claims of white supremacy Europe as the unique source of wisdom.
And that intellectual claim then needed reinforcing. Through institutions, through laws.
And absolutely had to be institutionalized, baked right into the fabric of American life. Think about marriage laws, anti-miscegenation laws.
Right, prohibiting interracial marriage.
The research frames these as more than just social control. They were like systems of genetic gatekeeping. The goal was preserving white purity, controlling lineage, ensuring power flowed through specific families.
That's a really striking way to put it, laws as genetic control.
And alongside that, you had property laws, slavery codes. These systematically denied full humanity to African, Native, and Asian peoples. They were either property, chattel, or simply ineligible for citizenship, for land ownership.
And this required justification. You couldn't just do it. You had to explain why.
Yes, and the justification came from the highest levels. We're not just talking about, popular prejudice. This was academic.
You mean like scientific racism?
Absolutely. Things like eugenics, phrenology. These weren't fringe ideas back then. They came out of elite universities. They were in textbooks well into the 20th century. It was mainstream, state-sanctioned science defining racial hierarchies.
Wow. And religion played a role, too.
A huge role. Christian doctrine was often interpreted to provide a kind of divine permission slip for expansion and domination. Think manifest destiny.
The idea that expansion was God's will.
Right. So you have this powerful alignment, legal, scientific, religious, all working together to encode whiteness as the invisible norm, the default human standard. For centuries, American civilization didn't need defining because it was just assumed to mean white, Western, European inheritance. #tag2, the turning of the demographic tide.
Okay, so if that entire system was built on the assumption of whiteness as the permanent center, what happens when the numbers start to change, when that center looks like it might not hold?
That brings us right to this current moment, this demographic turning point. The system is hitting what some call a statistical cliff,
Meaning?
meaning the projections are clear. Americans who identify solely as white are on track to become a statistical minority within about a generation. Now, for some, that might just sound like a demographic fact.
But given the history we just discussed.
Exactly. Given that history, it's not just a demographic shift, it's an existential crisis for the nation's inherited self-concept.
Because for so long, American implicitly meant white, or at least Western European.
Precisely. When that core identifier is no longer the statistical majority, the very foundation of that old identity starts to feel like it's dissolving.
And you see the psychological impact of that everywhere now, don't you? The polarization, the cultural anxiety.
It's the fallout. This deep anxiety about losing the center, losing the dominant narrative. It fuels so much of our current political climate. It's not just about policy differences, it's fear. Fear of displacement from that assumed center.
So if we connect that back, things like slogans about making America great again.
Yeah, they take on a different meaning, right?
They become, in this reading, powerful psychological attempts to kind of rewind the clock, to reassert that white-centered identity, that hierarchy, in a world that's undeniably becoming more diverse.
Wow.
It's a longing for a simpler, more exclusive past.
And the research suggests the intensity of that reaction. It correlates with how fast the demographics are changing.
Yes, there's a strong correlation suggested. The faster the shift, the more intense the backlash, the desire to hold on to the old definition.
So we're standing at this huge threshold, a moment of potential transformation.
Yeah.
What are the real paths forward when the group that was the minority starts becoming the majority?
Well, broadly, two paths emerge from the analysis. Path one, the nation genuinely transforms. It embraces being a truly multicultural, pluralistic civilization.
Or path two?
Path two, it retreats. It doubles down on a kind of defensive nationalism, trying desperately to preserve the old exclusive identity, even against the demographic tide. And there's a fascinating historical irony here, isn't there? If America does manage to transform.
Right. If it becomes this genuinely multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan nation, it might actually end up resembling the true origins of all that ancient wisdom the West borrowed and then erased.
Yeah.
From Kemet, India, China.
So it would be like a return, accidentally, to the plural human story that was suppressed centuries ago.
In a way, yes. A kind of unintentional correction of that historical rewrite.
Let's talk about this symbol that carries all this weight, Uncle Sam. Historically, who was he? He wasn't just, the guy on the tax poster.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. The historical archetype was clearly the Anglo-American patriarch. Stern, moralistic, the embodiment of Western authority and that racial hierarchy we discussed.
He reflected the vision of the founders, in a sense, claiming the right to lead, maybe even discipline the world.
That's the image, the authority figure. But today, that image is fractured, contested.
How so?
Well, you see him almost split in two. One half seems to be clinging desperately to that old myth, the stern white father figure.
And the other half?
The other half is morphing. It has to reflect the reality of who makes up America now. You see black faces, brown faces, Asian faces wearing the stars and stripes in positions of power, shaping the nation.
So he's like Janus, the two-faced god, looking backward and forward at the same time.
That's a good way to put it. And that split really defines the choice ahead. The path America takes will reshape that archetype.
So what are those two paths for Uncle Sam's future? Let's start with the hopeful one.
Path one is rebirth. America actually transcends its white European origins. It integrates its full multicultural reality and becomes something new, a truly planetary multinational civilization that honors all its diverse roots. That's the big evolution.
Okay, and the alternative, path two.
Path two is what the sources term revival, but it's really a repetition. They call it white supremacy 2.0.
Okay, white supremacy 2.0. We need to unpack that. What does that actually look like? How does the old system adapt?
Well, WS 2.0 understands that explicit, old-school exclusion isn't really viable anymore, especially in a majority-minority nation. So the system tries to reinvent itself using cosmetic diversity.
Cosmetic diversity, like diversity as a brand?
Kind of, yeah. It's about appearance. You might see more diverse faces in prominent roles in corporations, in government, in media. Representation increases. But the underlying structures, economic power, legal frameworks, the dominant ideology, they remain largely untouched. The old hierarchy persists, just hidden behind new, more subtle language.
So it's representation without a real transfer of power. tokenism on a grand scale.
That's the critique. The power structure adapts by looking inclusive, by showcasing diversity, but it maintains control by shifting the criteria. Instead of overt race, it uses seemingly neutral terms, like meritocracy, or cultural assimilation, or professionalism. But the standards for merit, or what counts as assimilated or professional, they're still subtly defined by those inherited Eurocentric norms. So the old guard effectively maintains control, just using different words, #tag5e, the colonial context and the narrative of control.
Okay, if that subtle control structure, WS 2.0, is designed to keep the old foundation going, we need to look at how that foundation was built and sustained. The sources are pretty blunt. America's rise involved, well, theft of wisdom, labor, land.
Right, and this connects directly to how we think about immigration and the movement of people. It wasn't always just individuals seeking opportunity.
How else should we see it?
Particularly during the peak European colonial era, immigration often functioned as a systemic colonial device. It was a tool.
A tool for what?
A tool for empire, exporting European populations, establishing settlements, imposing governance structures, often under the guise of bringing civilization. It was expansion through cultural camouflage, settlers as the advance force.
And you're saying that history shadows modern immigration policy.
Absolutely. The way immigration policy works today, deciding who gets in, who's considered desirable, who belongs it, continues to shape the national identity and preserve hierarchies that have deep roots in that colonial past.
So controlling the borders is really about controlling the narrative, defining who gets to be American.
It's about managing meaning, drawing lines between the use-ifies of the national community and the outsider, the potential threat. It's a way to maintain that traditional Western civilizational self-image, even while the faces within the border change.
And the sources give some really concrete, frankly shocking examples of how this wasn't just about land and labor, but about knowledge and cultural wealth being extracted intentionally.
Yes, this wasn't accidental collecting. Think about the Rosetta Stone, seized by Britain from the French, who took it from Egypt under the 1801 Treaty of Alexandria, a colonial transaction for an artifact key to unlocking Egyptian history.
Right. Or the Benin bronzes.
That's perhaps the starkest example. Over 4,000 incredibly intricate bronze sculptures looted by British troops in 1897 during a punitive expedition, systematically plundered.
And they didn't just disappear. Where did they go?
They were sold off. Many ended up in the collections of major Western museums, the British Museum, the Met in New York, museums in Germany. The sources argue these institutions were active participants, essentially laundering plunder as scientific discovery or colonial collecting.
Wow. And there are other examples too, right? Like the Nefertiti bust.
Yes, the removal of the Nefertiti bust from Egypt by a German archaeologist in 1912. Egyptian authorities have long alleged he deliberately downplayed its significance, possibly hid its true appearance, to get it out of the country.
So the pattern is intentional extraction, often masked by academic or scientific justification.
Exactly. It shows how the creation of Western cultural and intellectual repositories like museums and universities was deeply entangled with the systematic stripping of wealth and knowledge from other parts of the world.
And holding these artifacts, it reinforces the narrative of the victor, right? The hunter's narrative, as the sources call it, because you literally possess the evidence of the other civilization's genius.
Precisely. It helps control the story of who created what, who discovered what, and who gets to define civilization itself. #tag outro.
So let's try to synthesize this. We've talked about the codified foundation, the demographic tipping point, the potential futures for Uncle Sam, the colonial context of control. What does this mean for you, listening now, trying to make sense of America today?
Well, I think the core takeaway is that this identity crisis, as jarring as it feels, isn't necessarily the end. The sources frame it more like the death rattle of an old imperial model trying to hang on.
And maybe, simultaneously, the labor pains of something new trying to be born.
Exactly. It's forcing a confrontation. Can the nation actually evolve beyond separation, beyond that inherited exclusivity?
That really is the question, isn't it? That old, implicitly white identity that defined the idea of America for so long, it's dissolving, being integrated just by demographic reality.
So the choice becomes clearer. Repetition means finding new ways to maintain the old order. That's the white supremacy 2.0 path. Rebirth means grappling honestly with the foundations.
Acknowledging the stolen wisdom, land, and labor.
And then actually restructuring things based on that truth. A much harder path, obviously.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's certainly given us a lot to think about.
And maybe here's a final thought for you to wrestle with, thinking about America's future and its place in the world. If any civilization, anywhere, continues to define itself primarily through exclusion, through controlling who gets in and who stays out. Can it ever truly move beyond its imperial origins? Perhaps the deeper challenge for humanity is to decolonize the very idea of migration, to stop seeing it as a threat or as a tool of empire and start seeing it for what it is, maybe the most fundamental shared expression of the human journey itself.
In the end, every story is more than history. It's energy, vibration, and memory. What we remember determines who we become. This is Culture and History, his story. Join me next time as we trace the journey of culture and history of humanity. Until then, reflect on your story, because humanity's culture depends on it.